Good afternoon and welcome to the WEM Governing Body General Session meeting. Please note that today's call is being recorded, and currently all attendees have entered in a listen-only mode. There will be opportunity for public comment throughout today's call, and we will give you instructions on how to enter the comment queue at that time. With that, I'd now like to formally begin today's meeting and turn it over to Chair Robert Konziolka. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the June Regional Western Energy Markets Governing Body General Session. I'd like to note that this is the third year we've had a regional meeting, and back again after our break due to the COVID, and we are in Reno. We're pleased to be here, and at this point in time, I would like to turn it over to Corporate Secretary Roger Collington for a roll call.
Thank you, Chair Konziolka. We'll start with you, Chair Konziolka.
I am here.
Vice Chair Wagner.
Here.
Member Campbell.
Here.
Member Deck.
Here.
Member Prescott.
Here.
All present in the conference, we have a quorum and we proceed. Let me know that my notes here regarding Silas, our operator, mentioned the prince for entering the queue for public comment, and he will assist us at that point with public comment. Also, there is for folks in the room, there is a center with some reference material, public comment card. So if you're in the room and want to make public comment, please fill out the book to those to Stacy.
Okay, thank you. So with that introduction, our first action is to determine if there are any general public comments. So comments not related to specific agenda items. So with that, we'll check the room to see if there is anyone who wants to make a general public comment. I'm not seeing any, so Silas, can we check on the phone line to see if anyone wants to make a public comment?
If you would like to speak under general public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. If you are dialed into the phone only line, you can press #2 on your telephone keypad if you would like to make a public comment. At this time, we do not have any hands up in the comment queue.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 2, which is the decision on the meeting minutes. So,
Thank you, Chair Konziolka. We have a motion to approve the May 20, 2025 general session minutes for the WEM governing body.
so second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, governing body members. The motion passes. Back to you, Chair Konziolka.
Thank you. Before moving on to agenda item 3, which are the CEO remarks, I have the honor privilege to introduce a resolution. As probably everyone here already knows, John Prescott is term limited. He has been on the governing body for 9 years, and it's with great gratitude that we have developed a resolution. And John, you know the routine. And so introduce this, and then I'll ask for opposed. But let me read this for everyone. And I apologize that it may be a lengthy resolution of appreciation. Whereas John Prescott has served as a member of the Western Energy Markets Governing Body, formerly the Western Energy Balance Market Governing Body, since its inception in 2016, he was reappointed twice due to his deep experience in energy markets, his sound wisdom, talent for listening, and ability to advocate for market effectiveness, providing 9 years of dedicated service. And whereas John Prescott has significantly influenced the policy and operations of the Western energy markets through his advocacy and understanding of how different approaches affect the value of the Western energy imbalance market. And whereas John served as chair and vice chair of the governing body. He served on the nominating committee, the governance review committee, and as a market expert liaison, where his knowledge and experience improved the standing of each role. He served as liaison to the Pathways Formation Committee in his concluding term. And whereas John was greatly appreciated for his valued input, wisdom, and mentorship in bringing new members onto the governing body. He was forthcoming with his time, listening ear, and education for others. And whereas John has sustained stakeholder respect, John is respected for his follow-through on issues and ability to synthesize a multitude of perspectives and make decisions. John has a unique perspective in the ongoing changes of governance and how to navigate the evolving improvements towards greater independence. John was involved in every major change and decision that occurred over the last 9 years. And whereas John Prescott may now truly retire and enjoy his time with Patty, family, hiking, gardening and blueberries, finely crafted brews, time in Boise and Stevenson, the peacefulness of the great outdoors, and the vast world of ham radio. And whereas John has greatly left a mark on the Western energy imbalance market and its growth, credibility, and value in the best interest of consumers throughout the West. And whereas John's service will be missed by his colleagues, stakeholders, and friends, now therefore, be it resolved that the Western Energy Markets Governing Body hereby express their utmost appreciation and sincerest gratitude to John for his outstanding service and dedication to the Western Energy Imbalance Market, extended day-ahead market, and its many participants and stakeholders in furtherance of expansion and success of the markets. End of report. So, we have a motion by so moved.
Second.
And all in favor? Aye. John, thank you. And before I move on, I want to give the governing body members an opportunity to say a few words. So I'm going to go left to right. Andy.
Thank you. I want to just appreciate share my appreciation and admiration for my colleague, John Prescott. I feel very lucky to have been able to serve on this governing body along with John. I've come to view you as a mentor, as a friend during this time. I've just always admired how you were well prepared, very connected with stakeholders. I think you maybe described as a retired person before I joined the governing body. I don't know what this is what retiring means. I'm not sure. If that's what we're going to be, maybe it is. But yeah, and also just John's tremendous amount of fun. That means a lot. Really adds to the collegiality of our effectiveness. And just finally, I think John, you really had a tremendous impact on the Western energy markets, on where we are today. And you're a key individual in this last 9 plus years, and it's just the amazing community that has come together and really changing the way energy looks in the West. And John, you've really been a critical person in this process. So your impact has been huge, and that continues. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to add any remarks? Rebecca?
There we go. Thanks. God forbid I put my glasses on so I can see what I was doing. Oh, I don't want to break down reset, so I'm going to try and keep this short and high level. John, I got to know you when we were working on the governance review committee, and I really appreciated your input, your perspective, your style. You have this really cool style about how you approach things, complex issues, working with people. And it's something I truly want to emulate now. I'm ditching us. So I'm going to have to phone a friend. I really appreciate your counsel and your guidance, and I've really enjoyed working with you. And I'm kind of mad that we set term limits in the transitional committee. Right now I'm really bad, but I wish you well, and I hope that you'll still be on a phone a friend status for us. You You're a great governing body member and we've been lucky.
Oh, I asked that, but like, down to make sure I get those. So the most thing, like, biggest thing I can say to Tom,
Anita, can you bring the mic just a little closer? Sorry. Make sure people on the phone can hear.
for me, John's been a Saudi Corps collaborator for over 6 years, and he's been instrumental in pushing people and ideas as we've gone through this journey. Sometimes our pushes and pulls were pretty intense, but always to the betterment of the market, and it's John's decision, John's experience, his judgment, that sometimes prevailed even my thoughts. It was really a good thing, but I think we did get to a better place overall every time. They say everything, or they say good things must come to an end. But as we enter into this next iteration of what the market is, John's term is coming to an end too soon. Because he's been through the startups, he knows all the hiccups that are going to be along the way, and could guide us through many of those things that we're going to experience. And our thing when we're talking with John is we send a little text that says chat. And so if you see a chat, pick up the phone and chat. So I know John is going to get some chats from me. Something to look forward to. Yeah. For me, John's not a colleague in this forum, but I've known John for over 30 years. And it's that relationship that has just stood us both well in being better governing body members. And so the chat will be unique. They're not really retired. And you never know, when Dan or I might actually show up at Boise or Stevenson. And the best thing I can say is, John, you're not just a colleague.
Thank you. The governing body was quite eloquent in what they had to say, and between that, the resolution, the cards. Let me just conclude with John, we will miss you, I will miss you. A lot of personal satisfaction in working with you over the last 5.5 years. It really made it for a great experience that I never expected. And like all the other words that are out there, I really appreciated your honesty, your candor, and your thoughtfulness. And so, thank you.
The mic is mine. First of all, Andy, Rob, Rebecca, and Anita, thank you very much. It really means a lot to me. Those comments and a couple of interesting notes. I know we need to get on with the meeting, but Rob took over his chair, which probably was my rotation at the time. He was willing to step up, so I recognize that. I also recognize he's from Arizona, so he pronounces my name Prescott, which is fine because I'll accept it either way, because there is a Prescott, Arizona. Oh wait, Prescott, Arizona. Just another little side note. So in carrying on the tradition, I have a son in the industry. He's worked at Portland General and he's now landed at Idaho Power, managing the resource acquisition. So I'll still get reports from him as to what's going on in the world. So I value that. And right now, I think this thing is in good hands. I mean, look at this table up here, and we're going to be adding somebody else as a replacement that will be awesome as well. I'm sure that will be approved, I hope. And Randy Howard, we had a role in that. And so it's in good hands and it's okay. It's good. It's time to move on. So with all the accolades you've bestowed on me, all I can say is two things. Aw shucks and end of report.
Item 3, and then we have to top that. But so this is CEO remarks, and so that would mean your floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Casio. It is going to be tough to top to Members of everybody, I just want to start first of all, thank all of you for being here in Reno. I've always felt that's just a wonderful gesture. We traveled to the service territory of our key partners. It's wonderful to see you here today. Yesterday, I also wanted to thank everybody who participated in yesterday's regional issues forum. It was just really good dialogue. Really appreciate all the turnout and engagement there. I look forward to Allie Mason's readout later today. Of course, John, not much more to add. It's all been said, but on behalf of all of us at the council as well, we're going to really miss you. Just congratulations on 9 years of outstanding service. Of course, I know that you'll probably have a little bit more bandwidth for the Wednesday hiking club, but I know you're going to be keeping an eye on what's going on. So, thanks for stewardship. Wish you very much best. Also, to Chair Conzioka, I wanted to thank you for your year of leadership as chair. Always appreciate your insights. And looking forward to the segments later this afternoon as we refresh the membership and the leadership of the governing body. I also wanted to thank Howard. So it's going to be a good meeting. We're going to, of course, have a chance to hear from Commissioner Aguilera, the body state regulators. So I appreciate that. And Neil Miller is going to be giving us an update on Westway transmission activities. And then just finally, those, we continue to, I think, make great progress in EM implementation with both Singapore and Portland. This is just a big laser focus. And looking forward later today to the discussion with Susan Hope and tomorrow's meeting as well on our revised decision making, our revised congestion management proposal. So thanks again to everybody. It's wonderful to see folks in 3D and look forward to a productive meeting. Back to you.
Elliot, thank you. I'm going to check. Oh, okay, we're good. I will just take and make certain that we're all connected here and online. So next agenda item is agenda item 4, which is an update from the body of state regulators. With us is the author chair, Gabriel Aguilera. Gabriel Aguilera is a commissioner from the Mexico Public Regulation Commission, and he is online to provide us an update. So, Commissioner Aguilera.
Good afternoon, Chair Conzioka, Vice Chair Wagner, and members of the Western Energy Markets Governing Body. Apologize that I could not be there in person today, but thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on recent activities of the BOSSER. Since BOSSER's last report was just a month ago, my update today is relatively light. However, I know that there are a few important items up for consideration today and tomorrow, so I wanted to share a few remarks on behalf of the BOSSER. First, with respect to the nominating committee process, BOSSER was actively engaged throughout, providing input and feedback from the regulator's perspective to help fill the upcoming vacancy on the governing body. And Commissioner Hammond of Idaho, who currently serves as the BOSSER's vice chair and the representative for the BOSSER on the nominating committee, has done an excellent job of convening BOSSER members and facilitating constructive dialogue at each stage of the process. And BOSSER greatly appreciates the exceptional caliber of candidates that were under consideration this year and acknowledges the careful deliberation and time invested by the nominating committee in stewarding the critical governance function. The importance of maintaining a well-qualified and balanced governing body cannot be overstated, and BOSSER looks forward to the final outcome today. Additionally, I'd like to extend BOSSER's sincere appreciation to Member Prescott for his dedicated service on the governing body all these years. And thank you for the resolution. That was very nice as well. Member Prescott's leadership came at a pivotal time for the Western U.S. electricity landscape, and his thoughtful contributions helped guide the market through a period of rapid growth and regional collaboration. So we thank him and we wish him all the best in the next chapter, which appears to be true retirement, but who knows? So thank you again for Member Prescott for your lasting impact. Next, I have just a few remarks related to the Congestion Revenue Allocation Policy Initiative. As Commissioner Hammond mentioned to you all in May, Bosser focused much of its time this spring on understanding the design changes under consideration this week. And due to the expedited pace of the initiative, Bosser was not able to develop a position. However, we recognize that as organized markets evolve, the transmission paradigm in the West may also shift. And while Bosser is not submitting written comments at this juncture, we have dedicated significant time and to closely examine the complexities of the proposed changes. At our April in-person meeting in San Diego, we invited CAISO management to give a comprehensive overview of the current EDAM congestion revenue allocation design. And at our meeting last week, we invited ISO staff to present the final proposal to members. We look forward to monitoring this market design as EDAM goes live, and also look forward to the analysis from the ISO and DMM and the Market Surveillance Committee as data is collected. Lastly, I wanted to acknowledge some of the work currently being conducted in the Regional Issues Forum, and particularly surrounding the proposed enhancements to evolve the stakeholder process at the ISO. I understand the RIF had a meeting yesterday in Reno with a packed agenda covering topics that included SEAMs and market participation implementation updates, and as well as an update to the RIF's evolution and role in the ISO stakeholder process. So Bosser is monitoring the developments taking place and will provide input when appropriate. Looking ahead, our next meeting will take place virtually on July 11. This concludes my report. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I'm happy to take any questions that the governing body may have.
Everett, thank you very much for those remarks and that update. Let me check and see if there are any questions or comments. And there are none. So with that, appreciate your time and for joining us and sharing those insights and perhaps that update. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have the update on the Regional Issues Forum. And with us today is the RIF Chair, Allison Mace. Allison is the Manager of Bulk Marketing, Market Analysis, and Policy at BPA. So with that, Chair Mace.
Thank you. Chair Conzioka, Vice Chair Wagner, members of the Western Energy Markets Governing Body. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to share an update from the Western Energy Markets Regional Issues Forum. As you know, we held our June RIF meeting yesterday here in Reno. Thank you to the governing body members for joining us at the meeting. We really appreciate you making the time to come and join us and participate in that meeting. It was a great meeting. I'd say it was very well attended. We were happy with the content and the attendance. And I just want to note a few of the panels and discussion from yesterday. So we kicked off with the Market Scenes panel, which brought insightful discussion from the panelists and a lot of interesting thoughts on the efforts ahead of us regarding market scenes. We had good questions and engagement from the audience and a lot of good discussion. I just want to note a few key themes that emerged from that conversation. One of those was the importance of a focus on reliability and a focus on execution of the markets and prioritizing getting the implementation successfully going. The idea of breaking the communication scene in the West and all working together to build collaboration across the region. And then towards the conclusion of the session, it was a lot of discussion about the development of a roadmap for Seams work to see where we have been, where we need to go, and what the key stops along the way are. The RIF will continue to explore how it can support Seams conversation in the region and opportunities for future discussions at RIF meetings and future engagement with sectors. After that, we heard an update on the WEM implementation from Black Hills Energy and BAG Montana, including updates on the other efforts they're working on to prepare for the implementation. I think we were all very impressed with the multiple efforts that both entities are tackling over the next year. And it seems like to have a great grasp on all the work they have ahead of them. So we're excited to welcome those two new entities to the group. Then RIF liaisons provided an update on the RIF enhancements project. Mainly, we covered a summary of stakeholder comments. The RIF received a diversity of comments from stakeholders. We really appreciated the input and we're very glad to see the engagement from stakeholders. The RIF liaisons will be discussing those comments and processing where to go from here with those and preparing our next proposal for Q3 of this year. Finally, we wrapped up the meeting with an update on the day ahead market enhancements implementation. I also want to note with the presentation today from the governing body's market expert and the joint governing body and CAISO Board of Governors meeting tomorrow for a decision on the EDEN congestion revenue allocation. I'd like to note the RIF's comments to the governing body on that subject. In light of the varying stakeholder perspectives on the proposal, both within and among the sectors of the RIF, as was evident in the stakeholder comments, the RIF's comments did not provide a recommendation for or against approval of the proposal, but instead summarized the comments and provided some of our perspective on the important elements to consider in the decision. Consistent with the discussion in that RIF comment, the liaisons view the proposed solution as transitional and recommend development and implementation of a durable long-term solution to the identified issues regarding the EDEN congestion revenue allocation through a subsequent phase of this initiative as proposed. As you have read in our comments, we provided more detail as well behind that and a summary of stakeholder comments from our sectors. So now looking ahead, the RIF will focus on the RIF enhancements work in the near term to discuss those comments and develop a proposal for the enhancements, as well as a proposal for how and when we will implement those enhancements. We know we have a lot of exciting opportunities in that and a lot of work ahead of us to make some of those changes. We do expect to hold a virtual meeting in the fall and we'll soon begin agenda development for that session as well. So with that, that concludes my remarks. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair Mays. Let me check if the governing bodies have any comments or questions.
So I just want to make a comment about this, the folks that may not have been there, folks on phone, the RIF really has up its game. And I thought they did an excellent job as a follow-on count from the previous RIF meeting earlier this year. And I really want to applaud the RIF leadership, the liaisons, people that are putting a lot of work into making the RIF really be what it should be. Just someone that does provide education, but an entity that also helps to provide an opinion and advice to the governing body to help us to make us stronger as well. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I want to acknowledge Rebecca's work this last year as the RIF liaison.
Yeah, neglected to acknowledge that. It has been wonderful to work with Rebecca this last year as the RIF liaison. We very much appreciated her insight and support throughout the year.
Yeah, I'll echo the great work that RIF has done, and we are very appreciative of the time and effort that our liaison do to make certain that there is good communication between the governing body and the RIF. Chair Mays, thank you very much for that update. Our next agenda item is a briefing on West-wide transmission activity. And with us today to make that presentation is Neil Miller, Vice President, Transmission Planning and Infrastructure Development at CAISO. And as I mentioned, that this is our annual regional meeting. So as we hold these meetings, we try to get in a topic of regional interest. And so this will be our third year in a row doing this. So with that, Neil.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So first off, I should mention that despite the collaborative nature of the interregional planning activities, of course, everyone's participation in those efforts are shaped by their own needs and perspectives, and we're also part of that. So as I walk through some of the interregional work that USO is participating in, it's based, of course, on our own planning activities, taking into account our own perspectives. So if I could move to the next slide, please. So just by way of quick background, we do coordinate with the rest of Western Interconnection, most of which is outside of the ISO or FEO structure. So of course, most of the West, the participation is through interregional planning regions that were established under Report 1000. Those include exchanges of information on an annual basis and public processes for disseminating that information and coordination. But of course, as many people are aware, the Report 1000 interregional process hadn't proven to be terribly effective. So most of the dialogue and advancement of projects has been through other forums and processes, such as the State Voluntary Agreement Framework that FERC also has in place, or other mechanisms like the Subscriber Participating Transmission Owner Law. Next slide, please. I won't go through every one of these, but there are some general groupings. So there are regional coordination and discussion frameworks. These include information sharing, studies being led by different parties, including FERC, NERC, WEC, Department of Energy, and we put in particular attention to the Western Transmission Expansion Coalition effort, the WestTech effort led by the Western Power Pool. There are, of course, also informal discussions with peer groups through different forums, opportunities to work on bilateral arrangements, as well as a lot of monitoring and participation on overall process development work going on. So there's a lot happening in this front. Like I said, I won't go through every initiative, but I just wanted to make people aware of the number of these discussions underway. Some, fortunately, have now been concluded, so that's allowed us to focus more narrowly on the ones that we think have the best opportunities. Next slide, please. Our own participation in these interregional processes is keyed off of our regional planning process that really helps us get our arms around our needs and what we need to bring to the table when we're conducting that interregional coordination. Our load forecasts and resource requirements work largely through state agencies, but also with the input from other entities within California, help inform our transmission planning process that more recently has seen quite a growth in development. After 3 years, transmission plans that averaged 5.8 billion in transmission, focusing primarily on policy-driven transmission, accessing renewable generation, meeting generation goals. This last transmission plan approved this May of 4.8 billion was focused almost entirely, very largely on reliability-driven requirements associated with load growth. Now, supplementing that planning process, we've also been conducting on a biannual basis a 20-year outlook framework that helps set context. And we're really happy that we had started that, because that was a huge jumping off point for our interregional coordination discussions. Next slide, please. Just so that people understand what's bringing us to the table and particular urgency around our interregional coordination, we have been seeing a spike in our load growth over the last 3 years. Last year's transmission plan was keyed off of load growth of under 1% per year. This year's plan was off about 1.6, 1.7% annual load growth, and we are looking at next year's plan keyed off of around 2.5% load growth. So significant uptick in load growth, driving significant resource needs. I also, for information purposes on this graph, provided a picture and the listing of the major transmission projects that were competitively awarded over the last 5 or 6 years. These are largely under development, although the Gates static bar compensator in Central California is now in service. And we are looking at the Round Mountain static bar compensator next year, helping provide critical voltage support on transfers inside and across the state. Now, the other transmission, as I mentioned, a lot of it is policy-driven transmission, but the competitive solicitation process is working quite well at getting good parties to the table wanting to build those facilities. Next slide, please. Our resource mapping is still very much conducted on a zonal basis that also informs our interconnection process. But I did want to draw particular attention to the two boxes outlined in orange on this slide. Our base case scenarios now are calling for the ISO footprint to be seeking to access over 5,500 megawatts of Wyoming and Idaho wind resources, as well as over 3,600 megawatts of New Mexico wind to provide a critical diversity of the resource fleet to help us move forward in meeting our resource needs. Now, those are the two main inputs into a lot of the intermunicipal coordination discussion as we work with our neighbors on needing to move a lot of power around us as we move forward. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we've laid out, and I should have mentioned, we are not trying to capture every project moving forward in the West, but we were trying to identify on this chart the major 500 kV projects in particular, and especially those that have enough our attention, something that we may be interested in, either participate in, or that could provide some underpinning for another level of development. I won't walk through every one of these, but I will note that there's some common characteristics. Many of these projects are either locally developed by the incumbent utility or are merchant transmission, but we do see the need to expand beyond that to also consider the possibility of joint participation in, I'll say, a more traditional rate-based type of project that's interregional as well. But when the merchant project is moving forward and can become a viable solution, like SunZia, like Transwest, we want to do everything we can to support those projects. It is a bit delicate, though, on the interregional planning and coordination side, as the regulated service providers are also looking at how to take into account the different merchant options as they're looking at what type of interregional projects would be the most viable going forward. Now, next slide, please. As I mentioned, our focus has been on recognizing the need not only for good economic transfers, but also accessing on a firm basis some of these out-of-state wind resources. We've been doing our planning coordinated with our neighbors, exploring, I need to emphasize at this point, we're exploring opportunities, both to coordinate on specific projects, as well as to leverage or take into account merchant projects that may be successful in moving forward on their own through an open solicitation process and gathering the commercial interest they need to move forward. Those rarely meet the need in their entirety. There is then a need to layer on some other network development around it so that all the parties that are interested can participate. This slide lays out the Wyoming projects, are the ones accessing Wyoming, Idaho. And on the next slide, this slide focuses on the different projects that are being raised for discussion at this time that would also access Desert Southwest renewables, focusing primarily on bringing resources in from New Mexico. Okay, if I can move to the next slide, please. So just by way of summary, that we are continuing the discussion as I mentioned in the past. I do need to emphasize that with the prioritization right now, focusing on the best effort as a way to develop and assess the common interest in many of these projects. That's where we're looking right now. And the topic that's come up in the past was around the use of the word actionable for the West Tech study effort. And to us, the actionable part of that study is if this is, to us, one of the first studies that's also really capturing a lot of the direct input from load serving entities about their resource plans, especially in that first 10-year horizon. And because of that, while there are some projections being developed to go to 20 years, we really see the value in this work is being off of actual input from the utilities, the load serving entities themselves, and being able to use that information with a higher degree of confidence to help screen the opportunities that we will then put more emphasis on, either on our own or in collaborating with the other interested parties in those projects. So at this point, I'm not in a position to tell you which projects we're throwing that weight behind, because we are looking to see what falls out of the West Tech effort first before we move to that next stage. But with that, we are optimistic about the progress being made on the West Water coordination. And we'll be continuing to look for those opportunities to partner on interregional projects that help support all of our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. So with that, I will stop there, but I would be happy to field questions, seeing I did gloss over the digital transition projects themselves. I didn't want to start a list of every one of them, but I also did want to mention, we know there are other projects out there, but we were focusing on the ones that have been raised in the forums that we're dealing with. Okay, let's stop there and see if there are any questions I did.
So let me start with the governing body. Are there any questions from the governing body?
I need it. Just make sure your mic is close.
The like, there's West Jack and what falls out of there, but is that timeline, when they stuff is gonna start falling out?
So the current schedule is to see a draft of the 10-year plan, 10-year results later this year before the end of the year. And then next year would be the 10 and 20, and looking at finalizing that work. So, and as I mentioned, we're really keen about that first 10-year tranche as well, because that's the one that's almost exclusive, because on the resource planning and load forecasting supplied by those people participating in the study, as opposed to doing however well done, but a projection on that into the 20-year time frame. Yeah.
No other question. I think I'm gonna, this is a question I asked last year, actually, like really a question I still have, but so congestion is sort of the topic of the day, and it's the topic of our meeting later today and tomorrow, the joint meeting. So I understand that in the latest CAISO transmission plan that there are many projects, number of projects that were recommended, and they're driven by reliability and by policy. I think it's kind of out of the frame. In the economic category, nothing is sort of identified as having been recommended purely because of that. I don't have a sense of what the bigger Western picture looks like in that sense, but I guess do you have a kind of a sense of a view on to what degree are these projects that are being talked about or underway or being constructed will have a meaningful impact on congestion around the Western grid?
Well, I think there are two parts to that, and they should also get probably one of the more sensitive issues about the 500 kV corridor inside California as well too. But just to back up, I will remind people that the Delaney Colorado River Transmission Project, as well as the Ariel were both approved by our board as economically driven projects. Now, by the time they actually got built, in Delaney, Colorado in particular, by that time, as people saw the project moving forward, interest had shifted enough that it also started to play a major policy aspect in accessing renewable generation development corridor. But the original basis was actually as an economic study. So there we do move on economic projects when we have a case. And the business case is really, like, from our perspective, and especially if it's interregional, we need to make sure that the benefits are there for our consumers so that they pay our share of the bill, and that there are also valid benefits for people on the other side that are paying their share. So that's an important part of it, and we do expect economics to be playing a major role in these larger interregional projects. Now, the one path that's been getting a lot of attention inside California is, of course, a path 15.6 congestion. And every year inside our annual transmission planning process, we do forecast the expected levels of congestion on those paths. And we produce a report showing inside our plan, ranking the highest to lowest the economic congestion that's being forecast to demonstrate both the amount of congestion and the value, and assess that against the cost of the upgrades that would be necessary to manage or to eliminate congestion. Now, this year's transmission plan was showing some, I don't want to call congestion good, but it's showing material congestion that is starting to get close to warranting taking action on that corridor. resource portfolios that we've already been given for the 25-26 transmission plan, we do see a reasonable probability that we'll be recommending upgrades to that corridor in next year's plan. It's not a guarantee, but all the signals are very positive based on building, translating last year's study work to the new portfolios and looking at expectations. So the economic studies, for many years, they were relatively flat because we were looking at periods of flat load growth. Energy transition was largely to meet state greenhouse gas goals, but as the loads climbing and our resource requirements are climbing, we are seeing the amount of congestion more positive towards triggering additional development.
Rebecca?
Thanks for the presentation, Neil. Just following up on what you were just saying about the top 15 corridor upgrades, what does that mean? New line, new, you say upgrades, what does that mean?
On that path, it would need new transmission. Yeah. There aren't really upgrade opportunities, viable upgrade opportunities for the require new transmission, which was one of the reasons, well, these have been among some of the highest congestion corridors in studies for many years. Getting over the price hurdle of justifying that against the cost, the annualized cost of new transmission was the barrier to moving forward.
And so would it be, there'd be two lines in the same corridor, so they're maintaining the existing line in the middle?
Well, right-of-way decisions, we tend to leave to the permitting process inside the state, unless there's a clear requirement, something has to be, in a parallel corridor. I should just mention though, there is a really strong push and pull of constantly paralleling facilities on major corridors. Because, well, on one hand, there were a lot of siting advantages to simply expanding an existing corridor. The flip side is the wildfire risk. We're constantly having to remind people that soot from wildfires, unfortunately, is too good a conductor. But you can use a corridor just by being close, smoke going the right way. So we do constantly have to also assess the risk to the corridors. So those are some of the offsetting things here.
I've got two questions. The first one is related to the slide showing the transmission line solutions for wind from the Wyoming area. And I realize it's a very conceptual slide. I don't think it was intended to be anything in particular, just movement. But I did note that your slide was showing transmission from the Intermountain West to Northern California. And my question is, the interregional transmission capability study that was issued last year specifically recommended transmission from the Intermountain West to Northern California. I'm just curious if that was incorporated as a result of that, or if there was consideration for that, or if there was no consideration for it.
Well, some of those studies had actually, some of the material going into those studies had actually come from us and from other participants in the West. So I think the bottom line for us on wanting to explore access into Northern California is that we are recognizing and not continuing to develop all of the out-of-state resources coming around through the south, through Palo Verde, through El Dorado, through the Vista area, that we do need to get that input injected into other places. So that had been part of our thinking for a few years, going back to once you get the numbers big enough, we need more diversity of injection points than just coming through the southern corridor. Now, the study you mentioned, they identified the support for that corridor through kind of an extreme event type approach, that in one of the more extreme scenarios they looked at, they did see that there would have been benefit. And that's another contributing factor, but it's very hard to build a major transmission line based on, I'll say, extreme event planning, just because of the risk reward. But it's another good input to have into the conversation.
Very good. The other one, question I have is not related directly to your work at all. And that is, I saw recently, in the last month or two, that FERC had a, uh, order that seemed to break up West Connect a bit. You know, you touched on the interregional planning between Northern Grid, West Connect, ISO, and it looked like in that order that the publics were being taken out of the West Connect footprint and being divested. I'm just curious, any basis for what you're hearing or seeing from them, or it's too early to tell?
No, we had, and I have to admit, we hadn't interpreted this that way. We did see that there were perhaps some conditions we attached that some public utilities might not find acceptable. That's something I'd have to take a second look at. But in terms of the coordination that we haven't seen any shift in discussion. I think the biggest part for us was, and I believe we at the ISO kind of underestimated how we interpret it. The FERC Article 1000 framework had put in place a cost sharing arrangement that we had always interpreted as the starting point in the discussion. Many of the other parties in the West interpreted it as a risk that it was a mandated cost allocation structure that clearly didn't work for most of the West. It gave us heartburn too. But that's where maintaining a good dialogue outside of that process or other ways to collaborate, coordinate around negotiated agreements has been very good. And we've been having excellent discussions with other parties in California about collaborative parties. So I haven't seen any of that causing any hiccups in the conversations.
Very good, thank you. If you don't mind, we'll check and see if there are any public comments. Silas, could we check to see, well, first of all, in the room, any public comments? And I'm saying, Silas, could we check online to see if there are any public comments?
If you would like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon at the bottom center of your Zoom screen, or #2 if you are dialed into the phone only line. At this time, there are no hands up in our comment queue.
Excellent, okay.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Next, we have agenda item 7, which is the WEM governing body market expert written opinion on extended day ahead market congestion revenue allocation. And so we have with us today online our market expert, Susan Polk. I'm just going to double check to make certain that Susan is online with us.
Right.
Okay. There she is. Good afternoon, Susan.
Hello, hi Ron.
And so we're doing something a little different today. In our last meeting, we had a formal presentation by Ms. Poe, and that was prior to the final version of the proposal. And during the last week, our market expert, Susan Poe, first provided a summary opinion, and then she subsequently had a final opinion posted. And so instead of asking Susan Pope to have a presentation day, you would just transition into the outcome of that proposal and then go into Q&A with the governing body and then allow for public comment afterwards. So at this point, Susan, are you ready for the questions from the governing body?
Absolutely. I just wanted to say good afternoon to you, Chair Konzioka, and members of the governing body, California ISO staff, Western energy market stakeholders, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss and explain my views on the California ISO's June 6th proposal to revise the congestion revenue allocation rules that are in the approved EDAM tariff.
Okay.
But this time I'd be happy to summarize my views or to take questions.
Very good. Let me just check if the governing body members would like a short summary of of your opinion. Okay, and so Susan, I think that they're comfortable with what material you've posted, and I think they would just like to go in and ask the questions that they would like to better understand. So,
Certainly.
so with that, I'm going to start with Member Campbell and then, okay, certainly, yeah, no. So let me start with Member Prescott and go that way.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And thanks, Susan. I always appreciate reading your opinions. They're well laid out, very thoughtful. So thanks. But so my question, it's really going to be kind of three parts. So get ready to copy, give you time. But you know, if I was to look at this final proposal from the perspective of a potential EDAM market participant, and I realize this final proposal is transitional, it is expected to change, but as it is written today, one you opined on, that the first question is it better than previous proposals? The second question is, does it provide certainty for the participant and their transmission customers? And then finally, does it still foster broad footprint optimization for the EDAM?
Those are excellent questions, John. Thank you. So looking at this from the perspective of a potential EDAM market participant, is it better than previous proposals? That, unfortunately, I think the answer to that question depends on how that particular EDAM market participant is situated, right? So for example, for an EDAM, potential EDAM market participant that up to this point solely has had an experience of having parallel flows on valuable internal transmission system internal to its footprint that have not been compensated. If that is something that has been a problem for the EDAM participant, and the converse is not true, which is that EDAM participants transmission service that it might provide to network customers or that it might have sold as point-to-point service does not reciprocally depend on parallel flows on other EDAM transmission systems. So if it's not benefiting under the current rules, but it is paying a cost under the current rules, then the presently approved EDAM tariff is probably the best for it. Because under the presently approved EDAM tariff, it would be fully compensated for all parallel flows. Under the proposal before you today, it would not be compensated for all historic parallel flows that have been used on its system, which would be that was the solution under the EDAM tariff. Rather, a portion of those congestion revenue payments would be returned to other EDAM entities whose OAK customers have parallel flows on the system. So that's an example to illustrate my answer, which is it depends. It depends on the balance of those two effects, John. How much a participant considering joining EDAM is currently allowing other parties to use its system without charge, and the extent to which it is using other party systems without charge today. So that's the it depends answer. Now, the current proposal before you today I think the California ISO has even described it this way. It attempts to it attempts to offer an intermediate solution. So it provides compensation for parallel flows, provided that they are not associated with balanced OAT self-schedules. So it gives some money back that parties aren't receiving today, but not all of it. So it's an in-between, it's a compromise, and I think it's a reasonable compromise. I hope that helps. Can I further explain that?
No, I think that's helpful.
Um, your second question, does it provide certainty for participants and transmission customers? I do not think what's before you today provides entire certainty for participants and transmission customers, because I think that it will require some additional market rules prior to EDAM startup to plug or address the known flaws in the proposal before you. I agree with the Market Surveillance Committee, although we may have differences as to process or timing, that the California ISO participating BAs and stakeholders need to work prior to the startup of EDAM in May of 2026 to have in place a set of market rules to limit the potential impacts of the flaws, especially with respect to the incentive for self-scheduling, otherwise called use it or lose it incentive, that are in the present proposal. Now, those additional market rules might be contingent. They might only apply under certain circumstances. Additional analyses along the lines that the Market Surveillance Committee sketched out in its opinion could be performed in advance of EDAM startup to clarify the types of additional rules that are needed, the stringency of those rules, whether they might only need to apply under certain very unlikely situations. But nonetheless, I think that those rules need clarification. And that leaves some uncertainty for participants and potential EDAM entities at this point in time. I will say that based on the limited analysis that the MSC was able to perform in the time period available and statements by the California ISO, it doesn't appear that some of those potential downsides appear very limited. And I think that's something to be confirmed, but I think that's something very encouraging. However, I do still think, and this was suggested by a question from a governing body member, that it would be appropriate to fully specify the rules that would apply in the event that something really went off the rails. You don't want to be doing that when the problem happens. When there's, I don't know, a terrible storm, something that could cause very extreme results. I think you want to clarify that, yes, this might only happen under very extreme results, but this is what will happen. And I think it's fair to tell people what those rules are. Your third question, does it foster broad footprint optimizations? based on what I've read from the California ISO analyses in the final proposal and the analyses that the Market Surveillance Committee offered in its opinion, I do think that there are going to be many, many hours without substantial congestion costs on the California paths that have the potential to motivate self-scheduling, and that in all of those hours, EDAM is going to be able to optimize the footprint exactly like we'd like it to. And that is going to provide the potential for substantial cost savings. What we don't know right now, and where the MSC has suggested that not that much additional analysis is needed, and that analysis could be done in the absence of having an EDAM simulation model available. What we don't know is how many hours that is. You know, maybe that's only, as they said, 60 hours a year. Maybe they're only 60 hours a year when what I'll call elective self-scheduling, that is self-scheduling that would not occur in the absence of the incentives under the proposal before you. Maybe they're only 60 hours a year when that would torque the optimization of the results. That would be terrific. And that might be the answer. I just don't know the answer right now, though. But I think that, again, I want to leave this with an optimistic spin. I think that on the whole, the downsides are possibly going to be the inability to optimize in not a huge number of hours, and the possibility that you want to think about for what do you do if there's some very severe event on the system? What do you want to do when self-scheduling occurs at that time? Hope that's helpful, John.
We hope my members have similar questions that are follow-up to that. Okay, so, Anita, would you like to go next?
I don't actually have a question, but I do want to comment just for the record, I guess. We've really been following this really closely. And I know that my colleague.
Excuse me, is that Member Campbell? I'm unable to hear you.
No, hold on. We're just looking at microphone just one moment.
I just need to get it closer.
Susan, can you hear Anita now?
Not well.
It's just odd to get real close to the mic. So that's why I want to make a little bit of a comment. So I really appreciate the work that you've done on this, and you've done it in an expedited way, even for us. And I think what's really important is that there has been a lot of work done on this issue. As a governing body, we've been briefed and kept up to speed. I know every one of us is following this really closely. So I really appreciate the additional information that we've received in this last week on this issue.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Pope, it's Rebecca.
Any other mics on?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Tech. Thank you for, I echo Anita's comments that your opinion is detailed, very helpful, and appreciate the work that you put into it. Obviously, that was no small task.
Thank you.
Under the section on monitoring,
Yeah.
You have several suggestions to the ISO, what ISO could do. Could you just highlight in your mind, like, what are the critical must-haves of your suggestions, or all of them must-haves? Obviously, if we move forward with this, monitoring is going to be a really important factor, and I want to have a sense of like ensuring that we are doing everything we possibly can. So
Okay.
are there any of those that really like flag me down, tell me that we need to have those?
Well, looking at this right now with that question in mind, I I feel like I wasn't sure at the time, so I put it in here. But I felt at the time that what is under bullets 1 and 2, and someone from the California ISO, correct me if I'm wrong, I felt that that's probably information that is already available. I think maybe I should have been clearer there, that I'm sure that the California ISO is storing this information and it's available. Perhaps what I'm trying to say here is that what is stored and available needs to be made available in a disaggregated form to the DMM, to the MSC, to me, and to the stakeholders. So, for example, if you look at the opinion of the MSC and its attempt to discern the possible impact of the proposal based on information that's publicly available, it was limited by the fact that by the way that the publicly available information had been aggregated or averaged. It was reported on an average basis over quarters or across all locations. So perhaps the way to read 1 and 2 is it's really not that there's more work, I suspect, in what the California ISO has to actually store, but perhaps more work to be done in terms of what is actually posted and made available for others to look at from the perspective of diagnostics. Has to be disaggregated in time and in location, for to get at the root of any problems that are occurring, if that's helpful. So I don't think that that's a big additional ask there. Um, Now, on point 3, um, I think that that one is very material and very important, and it's going to be especially important to do the piece that's in my second small bullet, which is how much residual congestion revenue allocation is really flowing to the California balancing area. I think we just don't know anything about that. And there's been a lot of suggestion that that will be material and that that might be a source of funding for CRRs, for example, in the CRR working groups that are occurring. I don't have any basis for understanding or knowing how material that amount would be. And I think that it's really important to illustrate that. For example, it could very well be that um, in the hours when congestion is really material, that 30% of it is flowing to O customers. And yeah, the O customers aren't getting a material allocate, aren't causing material peril flow in other hours, but there's not material congestion in those other hours that the CAISOs or the California BAA customers are accruing. So I think that one is really important um, uh, to uh, to look at. Um, so the magnitude and frequency of self schedules. Um, I think that one kind of speaks for itself, and I'm not really asking anything additional of the California ISO on that bullet point, except for them to make sure to disaggregate the information that they are collecting to distinguish the self-schedules that are arising from new contract reference numbers versus from existing contract reference numbers. I think yeah, that's the second small bullet. Oh, and then the third small bullet I think is also important, is to record, well, actually this one I don't think. Yeah, I mean, the third bullet's a little tricky, and what I've suggested might not be the best way to get at it. The concern there is actually one that I think where the market rules might be relatively tricky to develop, to limit impacts on CRR revenue adequacy, or really on congestion revenues garnered in other EDM BAAs that can arise from the kind of counterflow gaming that was originally identified by the DMM, that the MSC also discussed and I discussed in my opinion. So I think what the ask there really is for, the possibly looking for new point-to-point OAT contract reference numbers that are potentially implicated in some sort of an intentional use of counterflow to garner unwarranted payments. Let's put it that way. So, I think that's something that the DMM could possibly look for as well. But once you start disaggregating and providing information about the locations of the source and sink of new point-to-point contracts, I think it's going to be possible to figure that out. So I'm sorry, it took me a little while to think through and answer that question. But I think on the whole, I'm not asking for a lot of new information. I'm mostly asking for disaggregation of what has already been promised.
Thanks for going through that, and clarifying that point. I appreciate it.
Okay, so now next we'll go to Andy Camp.
Thank you, Dr. Pope. Question, what are your recommendations under the prior to EDM implementation is around new oat rights? So some of this I hadn't really thought about until I read your analysis, which I really appreciate a new issue being kind of illustrated. So I have had my mind on, as many stakeholders have, on how the day one policy could create an incentive for self-scheduling. And I understand you're additionally pointing out that it could create an incentive for more purchases of transmission rights because of them being able to exercise the self-scheduling. Right? I want to make sure I understood that right. And I wasn't totally clear on what recommendation you were making around that topic.
I think I'm sort of recommending that it be tracked. I think it appears again under the monitoring, in the monitoring section, that where the California ISO that it's going to track, and this is a quote, the magnitude and frequency of self-schedules across EDM balancing areas, including and the associated contract record number. What I'd suggested there is that they break out and specifically highlight, or I don't know if it's a special report or a flag, schedules arising from new contract record numbers. If there's a way to identify what's new, presumably there's some sort of repository of all where you can pull down and download a list of all existing contract record numbers. So the idea would be just let's highlight and flag whatever is new, because you know this sounds really cynical, but based on my business, working in this for a long time, I feel like if there's a hole in the market rules, people are going to find it and they're going to exploit it. And there are people already looking for the holes right now and trying to figure out how to exploit them. And looking at the congestion patterns and looking at where new point-to-point rights might engender, um, you know, uh, sort of new, possibly under, payments for counterflow. This is a puzzle just waiting to be solved by smart people with computers.
That's my only question on the day one proposal. I did have a question on the proposal for the kind of future, but that could defer that until other day one questions have been aired. Yeah, so our before us tomorrow is really just this day one proposal. Certainly that's our focus, but I do appreciate you, in addition to many stakeholders, KISO staff, are thinking about different directions things could go from here. And you speak a lot about the financial flow-based rights.
Yes.
And I can tell from reading that phrase that there's a lot behind it that I don't know. So I just wanted to briefly, if you could sort of speak to what are some of the key elements of financial flow-based rights and why that would be a desirable kind of policy allocation of congestion kind of framework in the context we're looking at.
Sure. So financial rights, we're giving them all kinds of different names in the different documents that are floating around: flow-based rights, flow gate rights, entitlements. I think we're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about rights to flows on specific congested facilities in EDAM BAAs. And just to further define what I'm talking about generally in this is I'm not talking about trying to create an entire system of CRRs for the whole EDAM footprint that would be the same CRRs for everybody in the footprint. I'm not talking about necessarily defining, I'm certainly not talking about defining rights for every potentially congested transmission element in the EDAM. I'm thinking more along the lines of what PJM and the MISO did for flow-based entitlements to manage parallel flows between their two systems. And what they did is they enabled that they divided up. This is how much parallel flow you get on this transmission element. And if you flow more than that, you have to pay for it. And so it was reciprocal. They each got some use of the other system. They divided it up based on historical use of each other's system. They said, this is how much we're going to allow you to have without paying for any additional. So that's kind of what I'm suggesting. The reason that's advantageous is because if you translate those into a financial type of right, which is really honestly what you have with the congestion revenue rebate system under the final proposal, that's basically a financial right to be rebated the congestion charges paid for a balanced self-schedule. It's a type of financial right. And I'm suggesting that that financial right to be paid the congestion value for a certain amount of megawatts of parallel flow in every dispatch would be very advantageous. Now, what makes that a financial right is that you get paid for that in every hour of the EDAM if there's congestion on that transmission element without regard to what the actual day-ahead EDAM schedules are for that BAA. It gets that money as a hedge. In the hours in which its schedules use that hedge, they'll be offsetting. In other hours, it might schedule something else, but it still has a right to that hedge. And it might be doing something else that is a better use of the transmission system, but also entails paying congestion from getting your power from somebody somewhere else. But you still get the hedge that you historically were getting by using maybe generators that aren't quite so efficient in the current dispatch, but you still get a hedge from those, but you get to do something more efficient. So by disconnecting the receipt of the hedge money, the financial payment from the flow entitlement, from the actual schedules, it it removes the use it or lose it incentive to make certain self schedules because you, because by doing the self schedules is the only way to get paid the hedge. That's the use it or lose it incentive, and it's probably described better by the DMM or by the MSC. But you're linking the payment of the hedge is predicated on doing a certain self schedule. You want to break that link by creating a set of financial hedges instead. And I would suggest, I didn't go into detail. I was trying to focus on what I thought you needed to know to vote on this, but I could go down the path and say, I think you need to do it for major constraints. You and I think it could be done in a way that would enable individual BAs to decide separately and in their own time whether they want to implement something like CRRs. So the financial flows from these flow-based rights that are just like these congestion revenue allocations we're talking about today would go to the BAAs, and the BAAs could use them to provide a hedge through their OAT rights, just as envisioned under the final proposal, or they could use those revenues as an input to providing a more CRR type financial hedge. So there'd be a lot of flexibility for the individual BAs to design their own path forward. Once you design those flow-based hedges and allocate them among the EDM BAAs. I think that's a really nice thing within the context of the structure of the WEM.
I just have a couple follow-up questions for you. The first one is, you laid out that you support the proposal, and then you've outlined, your concerns on the overall detailed proposal. And the governing body members have kind of, peel back some of the layers on that onion, and I kind of want to go back to a high level perspective. And that is with the initial transitional proposal and then those additional steps, do you see the areas that you've listed as concerns and as you just explained now as items that can and should be addressed in that next transitional stage?
Yes. So, but only at a high level, Chair Konzioka. So I think that and I don't know what the metric would be. I think there should be some point at which and maybe this is it really a reliability based issue. There should be some set of principles or guidelines developed at which point the quantity of self-scheduling would be deemed to be excessive. One thing I have to say that I found it difficult to think through is how the self-scheduling would play out in the context of the new design you have for the EDAM that encompasses nodal scheduling of imbalance reserves to enable reliable operation at, I don't remember the right words for it, but you're basically, you're ensuring reliable operation, whether, you've got too much or too little, basically. You got two more power flows going on in your EDAM solution. And it's, I don't really have good intuition for how the self-scheduling impacts will play out within that new software design that you have for EDAM. And that's not something that I've seen or heard discussed. Maybe I'm blowing smoke and I don't know, boxing with mirrors here. Maybe it's a non-issue, but um, it's one of the things that leads me to think that, it would be good to define, if self-scheduling is slowing the EDAM solution time so that we can't meet our deadlines, our posting deadlines, X is going to happen or something. Or if we believe that self-scheduling is a cause of violating certain reserve requirements consistently because we can't place the reserves where they're needed, then something's going to happen. But that's the kind of thing I have in mind. And I guess those are principally reliability concerns. They're operational, they're reliability concerns, as opposed to saying we've got to limit the amount of impact on the cost savings, if that's helpful.
Yes, I think for the explanation, and again, I think we all recognize this is a very complex topic. It's, making changes that everyone recognizes need to be made. And it's hard to say there's no impact without making changes. And so, how do we manage those impacts? And of course, we have the legacy issues that are going on with the way that the Western Interconnection has been operated, getting folded into this overall management or new approach on having market solutions and retaining the best of both worlds, so to speak. But as you look at the proposal and you've outlined the concerns, during that process, were you able to identify anyone benefiting more so than they are today?
I think that the answer to that is no. I think that parties with oat rights today, and I admittedly don't understand everything that happens in the West today when transmission is derated. But as others have described, when there's a derating of transmission today, for example, oat rights, and I think this is already embodied in the EDAM market rules. So that's one reason I'm saying it's not making it worse. Oat rights are going to be honored. And typically parties who have used the transmission system and relied on the transmission system using other means to access it are going to be redispatched or face reduced ability or reduced rights to what is constrained because there's less of it. So the proposal before you, I think, kind of takes it further it further kind of cements in place what exists today, if is one way to put it, that tends to favor parties with oat rights over parties without oat rights. You know, and I think the example that's often given and that I gave in my opinion of what are do oat rights take a haircut along with everybody else when there's a transmission system derate? I don't think they do. And with EDAM and there being a bigger footprint through which redispatch can occur to accommodate the oat rights, it's going to be even more possible to accommodate them within the bigger footprint. So I think that's the best I can do with that question.
Fair enough. I think at this point, we're in transition to public comments. So please stay on the line in case we need to ask you a question. So first of all, we'll start in the room with public comments. We do have one. And so I'm going to ask Pam Swerver, Portland General Electric. Come on.
Thank you, Chair Consilioka and members of the governing body and ISO staff for accepting my public comment. And thank you, Dr. Pope, for the very detailed discussion of the proposal for us. I'll start by also sharing my thanks for John for his 9 years of service. I do remember one windowless conference room at the Embassy Suites in Portland and to another windowless conference room at the Renaissance in Reno. It's been quite a journey. It's been wonderful to have you on this journey with us. So I appreciate all of the challenges and complications that arise. We talk about congestion and the proposal before us. And I think congestion is definitely one of the most complicated topics that we can get into when we're talking about the energy markets and how are we going to equitably overlay an organized market framework on top of an open access transmission tariff with contract rights. And I am not going to get into as much detail as Dr. Pope, and please don't ask I got questions to get into that much detail. But I recognize the challenges that are being raised, and I think that these are valid and appropriate challenges for consideration. However, I do strongly urge you tomorrow to vote yes on this proposal. I do think that it is one of the key pieces and that it represents an equitable compromise in this kind of overlay between the open access tariff and the EDAM market design. And I think a lot of the challenges and opportunities that are being put on the table are really, I think, taking us away from the core EDAM design as we have today, where the proposal that is before us and it's been presented by ISO staff is consistent with the EDAM design and represents a specific and targeted opportunity to enable the design to go forward and for the market to go live. I do think it's important to understand what the goal here is. And for us as an EDAM entity with a tariff pending FERC and a go live date coming up in just over a year, and my friends at PacificWare who are now under a year to go live, it's really important to understand that this solution is a piece that will let us get to go live without any significant or without any delays. And that's, I think, the most important thing to keep in mind as we consider the proposal before you. Specifically for us, getting EDAM up and running is really important because as we look at a broader customer affordability challenge that is impacting basically every area of the business, from tariffs and supply chain to wildfire and a host of challenges that are facing our customers every day, EDAM is a really bright light that helps us capture those energy cost savings and helps reduce energy market volatility so that we can share that value with our customers. And this proposal keeps us on the right timeline for that implementation. For us, EDAM is important for enabling us to capture cost savings for customers, enabling diversity benefits and sharing of resources across a broad and integrated footprint with a robust transmission
connectivity across the different participating balancing authorities. And helps us, I think, address some of the emerging reliability challenges where we can see more coordinated day-ahead operations and commitment of the transmission system to help us address some things that are critical reliability, like the Northern Pearl constraint that we have seen emerge in the last few years as a real challenge to our operations. And I go into these key benefits of EDAM to really help highlight that as we talk through the minutia of this particular proposal, and some of the pros and cons that could be addressed in the future. I think, again, centering on the value that the EDAM provides holistically and the opportunity it provides for our customers is the really critical piece to keep in mind in evaluating this vote. I want to go into a couple key pieces before us. Again, this is a foundational solution, and we recognize that markets evolve. And I think a lot of the comments before you from Dr. Pope and from the MSC represent some really interesting opportunities for us to continue with this evolution. I think as we, like John, having gone through the early days of EIM Go Live, we recognize that when you have a new market, markets always are evolving. Every market around the West and around the country is continuously looking at improving and enhancing and getting more value for the customers, the participants in that market. And when you do something innovative like the EDAM, you have a period of increased evolution where you end up with significant evolution in a very rapid period of time. When we had the EIM, we had EIM Year 1 enhancements, we had EIM Year 2 enhancements, and then we just started calling them EIM enhancements. And so we had years of these evolutionary opportunities, but that did not take away from the foundation that EIM was providing value for customers on day one of operations. And I think that's important to recognize as we think through how this proposal could evolve in the future, so that we think about these solutions that will take more time to think about implementing. If we are basing the current congestion allocation framework on a consistency of an allocation from the ISO to the balancing authority, and then from the balancing authority to transmission customers who are active users of the system. I like to think about market design like an amoeba. It has lots of little tendrils that stick out. And when you're trying to get your market design to be equitable and just and reasonable, you start by poking one arm of that amoeba in, and you start to try to get it more and more like a ball. And right now the EDAM design looks like a ball, and this proposal keeps it looking like a ball. If we start thinking about going straight to something like financial transmission rights, you end up with an arm out here that might create tendrils and consistencies that aren't contemplated or made consistent with the other areas of the EDAM design, where I think the proposal is before you today lets us maintain that spherical nature, that integrated thoughtfulness of the total EDAM design, and lets us get to our go live date with that is less than a year away from us. So as we can think about evolution, I do think what we have today represents an important step forward and a foundation on which we continue to build. I'd be happy to take any questions.
And I think you said it well. Thank you. Cyrus, first of all, anybody else in the room that want to make a public comment? I see none. So Cyrus, let's go to online to see public comments. And if you could, if you're seeing multiple people who want to make comments, please let me know how many you see.
Yep, absolutely. So if you would like to make a public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. Or if you are dialed in through the phone only line, you can please press #2 on your telephone keypad if you would like to make a public comment. At this time, we do not have any hands up in the comment queue.
we will move on. Dr. Pope, thank you so much for being with us and going through your material and answering our questions. We appreciate that.
Thank you all.
So we'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the decision on the WEM governing body nominations. And to introduce this topic, we have Stacy Crowley, the Vice President, External Affairs with CISO.
Thank you, Chair Conzilka. I just want to make sure people can hear me. Good. Thank you. Just a quick introduction of the Western Energy Markets Nominating Committee. They've completed the process with the 2 open seats on the Western Energy Markets Governing Body after the extensive review, including candidate interviews and sector outreach. Their dedication and thoughtful approach have been instrumental in identifying really highly qualified candidates. I want to thank Randy Howard, our longest serving member of the nominating committee, for being here in person in Reno, for his leadership as the chair of the committee and for presenting the committee's recommendation. The governing body led us to consider these nominations. And just quickly, I want to thank Holly Taylor and Greg Fisher, who were working very closely with the search firm and the nominating committee throughout the process. Thank you for all your hard work. Turn it over to Randy. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Before I get started, I want to give my thanks to John, Member Prescott. I can remember considering his resume in the very first opportunity to do nominations. And I thought, do we really want to move this guy forward? No, he's a typical engineering type. Is he going to be successful in this role? And Member Prescott, I just want to say, I think the West won the lottery. We have you for 3 terms to see all the work done in helping us expand this market, all of the time that you have dedicated to being out and about into my conferences for Northern California Power Agency and all over to share, to listen. And I just so appreciate it. Thank you. Because you really have shown what can be done. And as we're hearing about EDAM, so excited about EDAM, but you really we're at this place only because effort from all of the board members, but Member Prescott, you were very engaged from the beginning in helping us be successful in the EIM. So thank you very, very much. I have the privilege of going through a presentation. Next slide, please. So as indicated, we have the terms are up for 2 of our governing body members, Member Prescott and Member Campbell, and their terms will end effective June 30th of 2025. So the members are nominated by a nominating committee of stakeholder representatives and appointed by the Western Energy Markets Governing Body. So we started the process for this year in identifying potential candidates, kind of going over the process in January of 2025. Member Prescott, his term is expiring. It has reached the full term limit. I didn't make that decision on term limits, but that is the case. And it sounds like he has lots of other opportunities to engage in other activities from this point on. I will say when we first interviewed him, I think we made it known that we thought he would have about 4 meetings a year. Quarterly, I think we were discussing, and it would be limited time commitments. And I think we all recognize and realize that isn't the case for our board members. I think we currently tell the current candidate pool expect to give about 30% of the time. It's a very extensive amount of activity to understand these complex issues, to go over to meet with folks, to learn about it. It takes a lot of effort, so it's quite the commitment. Member Campbell's term is expiring. He has expressed to the nominating committee his desire to be nominated for an additional term. Next slide, please. So this slide really discusses, this is a stakeholder-driven process. The nominating committee consists of representatives from 8 sectors. I won't go through each of the party and the sectors and their members, but we had a very strong group of participants, very active group. They knew their sectors well. If we heard from the bosser and just the efforts there of Commissioner Hammond. But that was true in all of the sectors where there was a good reach out to the sectors themselves and input throughout the process. We were fortunate to have Member Prescott actually participate with us as the representative for the governing body and Governor Ito representing the Board of Governors. They are non-voting members, but their input was invaluable throughout the process. So next slide, please. This just depicts the flow process that goes forward from the beginning to today, where we go through a process of determining, number of positions to fill in the nomination process, whether we have someone who would like to be renominated, and then what we do going through that process. We did engage an outside search firm to assist us in the process, but also what happens with each of the sectors is they have an opportunity to propose individual candidates to be considered. And so we had a number of candidates through this process this year that came through that. They're still all vetted through our search firm. The search firm was Korn Ferry. They did a fabulous job in supporting us and our needs in vetting the process, or vetting the candidates. We went from a long list that was supplied to our sectors to then bring it to a short list. And it was very difficult. Some of us had considered that this year would be a little difficult with all the discussion going on in regional organization, that we might not have as many interested participants in being part of this. We were wrong. We had an incredible pool of potential candidates. And it was a very difficult decision for us to even narrow it down to 6. Then we interviewed 6 candidates through this process, and then we brought it to a consensus, brought those back to the sectors, got input on that after the interviews, and we were able to get to a unanimous consensus on what we're proposing today. Next slide. So as mentioned, Member Campbell had expressed his desire to be reappointed. We went through an interview process with Member Campbell. We had some deliberations. We discussed the makeup of the existing governing body and the complementary skill sets that Member Campbell brings to the process. And there was a unanimous decision to renominate Member Campbell. As mentioned, Member Prescott, his term was expiring, and so we did go through an extensive process to find a replacement there. And so as mentioned, 10 candidates, 11 meetings that we held as a committee, conducted the 6 interviews, and then brought forward the nominee that I'm considered today. So the last slide. So the nominating committee is recommending that the Western Energy Markets Governing reappoint Member Campbell for a term beginning July 1st, 2025 and ending June 30th, 2028, and appointing Deborah Smith for a term beginning July 1st, 2025 and ending June 30th, 2028 to serve on the Western Energy Markets Governing. With that, we'll take any questions the governing body might have for you.
So, Nominating Committee Chair Howard, thank you for that presentation and overview. And before I have questions from the governing body, I'd like just to announce that both John Prescott and Andy Campbell are recusing themselves from discussion and abstaining from voting on this due to their terms expiring. So this will only be 3 of the governing body members. So I'm going to check and see if my colleagues have any questions. There are no questions.
Thank you.
You want to check for public comment, Chair?
I will. Just one moment. Sorry. Yeah, so at this point here, we will check for public comments. Are there any public comments in the room? Seeing none. Cyrus, can we see if there's any public comments online?
If you would like to make a public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 if you're dialed in through the phone. At this time, there are no hands up in the virtual comment queue.
Okay, very good. I think we can move on. We can move to a motion here.
Thank you, Chair Confield. Move that the Western Energy Markets Governing Body reappoints Andrew Campbell for a term beginning July 1, 2025, ending June 30, 2028, and appoints Deborah Smith for a term beginning July 1, 2025, and ending June 30, 2028, as members of the Western Energy Markets Governing Body. May I have a motion, please?
Second.
All in favor of the 3 that can vote?
Aye.
Thank you, members. The motion passes, and congratulations to Andy and welcome Deborah Smith.
We would like to welcome Andy for continuation. Welcome back. Your work has not just begun, but is ongoing. And welcome to Deborah Smith. And we look forward to her joining the governing body. And she gets no time in transition as we have a meeting in July and there is a decision like that's currently scheduled there. So we look forward to working with you, Deborah. Before we move on to our next agenda item, you heard the presentation, and I'd like to just make a few remarks about the work that Randy Howard has done on behalf of the nominating committee and the nominating committee itself. You know, most of the work by the nominating committee is pretty much unseen as a necessity, and all our meetings are done, I guess, apparently in windowless rooms, as I just found out. It sounds exciting. But Randy has been through this now 10 times. He was on the original nominating committee. He brought in our colleague John and the others, and there hasn't been a year that's gone by where there hasn't been a lot of work. In other words, I don't recall any particular year that you can say, this is an easy one, and we don't have to do anything. There has been the transitions where members have had to terminate early, leave early, and it's been a lot of work. And this is the time that the nominating committee has the chance on behalf of the members, participants, to shape the governing body and get the representation you want. And Randy has had his hand on it this entire time going forward. And I will speak just for myself that it has been really remarkable. The members you brought in and the chemistry that has developed. We're not seeing maybe some of the other issues you might see somewhere else. And everyone's been dedicated to outreach and understanding where the different stakeholders are on issues and making certain that everybody is heard. And so, Randy, from my grateful heart, thank you so much for everything that you've done on behalf of the nominating committee and all your other nominating committee members in getting us to where we are today. So thank you. So we now get to move on to agenda item 9, which is the election of the WEM governing body chair and vice chair. And Roger, you are here to introduce this topic.
I am. Thank you, Chair Conzioka. As you all know, that we have this annual process where we elect a chair, a new chair, and a new vice chair of the WEM governing body. This is your opportunity as the governing body to nominate members of the body to serve as the chair and as the vice chair. I'll turn it over to the governing body and let Chair Conzioka solicit those nominations.
Okay, actually, I'm quite prepared to move a proposal forward unless any of my governing body colleagues would like to make comments. And seeing none, let's move forward. So I would like to propose that Rebecca Wagner be our next chair. I'd like to propose that Andy Campbell be our next vice chair. The basis of that proposal is Rebecca's our current vice chair. And Andy, when he became our chair, his first time, he never had the opportunity to be vice chair. If you recall, Jennifer Gardner had to leave early, and so we missed that opportunity for him to transition. And so it's not just the opportunity to be a vice chair that you get to be, but I do think as we look at our issues over the next year and the substantive issues that we are going to face, that both Rebecca and Andy are really well suited with their experience and background on the types of things we'll be dealing with. And I think they will make excellent chairs and vice chairs of the governing body. So with that, if we can have the motion up. Go. Thank you for reminding me. I was ready to move forward. So, is there any public comments in the room? Seeing none, Cyrus, can we go to the online to see if there's any public comments?
If you'd like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 on the phone. There are no public comments up on the virtual line.
Okay, so we can fill in the blanks, and I'm going to wait for a sec.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
We can go with the verbal language on the board if you don't want to hear me. Did not happen with that. And we can just ask for a motion to elect Rebecca Wagner to serve as the chair of the WEM governing body and for Andrew Campbell to serve as the vice chair, with their terms being effective July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. Can I have a motion, please?
I moved it. I moved it to begin with, not a term.
You messed with it. This was your opportunity. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, everybody. The motion passes.
And they'll hopefully appreciate what they're getting into. So we have a couple more items here. The agenda item 10 is informational reports. And I'm going to check with the colleagues here if there are any items in informational reports. And there are none. Agenda item 11 is future agenda items. John, are there any future agenda items you would like to see? No, there we go. And so anyone's future agenda items that we don't already have noted somewhere. Okay, very good. I want to make certain that we ended on time or before, because John had told me that his flight leaves at 5:30. He wants to be on that plane. So with that, I only have one last thing to say. End of report.
Yeah.